Well, welcome everyone to this first webinar of the collaborative prototyping laboratory of the LAB03 in Medialab. For those that are joining for the first time or they didn't know what Medialab was, we are a research and production platform based in Madrid, funded and promoted by the City Council of Madrid. And we develop basically like interdisciplinary projects around different kind of research lines. We are here to present the three mentors that will collaborate with us into the development of our third lab. Labs are the main line of programming that we develop here in Medialab, which consists in a 6 to 8 month length interdisciplinary program to develop a project, the collaborative projects. Those projects are developed by interdisciplinary communities of different people and citizens from all over the world that join here in Medialab, after 6 months of framing and composing those different teams to develop those projects. The way in which we select those projects that we're going to develop here for the third iteration of the lab is through the open call that we are currently promoting here today, which is a very special kind of open call. Is an open call divided into 2 different phases. The first phase, which is now open, and it will be open until the 17th of September, is a phase where we are willing to receive different projects or proposal that delve or explore different topics related to the main research line that we are exploring in the LAB03, which comes with the name of synthetic minds. And hopefully during the day of today, during today's session, we'll be able to delve a bit around the different topics or potential projects that could gather around this very interesting topic. After this first phase that will end the 17th of September, we open a second phase, which is a phase to receive collaborators, different people which are interested about the projects that we will have selected through the first phase, and that will like to actually join with us here in Medialab and help to develop those different projects. Of course, this framework allows us to have like a very interdisciplinary community of people that are very well known in different kind of skills and expertises to develop these different projects. So what we want to address, what are the different topics that we want to address with this third lab of Medialab that is called Synthetic Minds. Distributed cognition, cybernetics, non-human intelligence, AGI, complex system, alien semiotics. These are just some of the different topics or themes that we can introduce within the overall topic and concept of synthetic minds, and is because in a time where which is defined by the revolution in machine learning, data mining, machine vision, and different so-called artificial intelligence technologies, our inquiry must go, or with it must go, beyond the purely technological to the very essence of what we conceive as intelligence itself. How does intelligence materialize in non-human or even non-biological forms, and how do these forms challenge our perception of the world and our very agency within it? To address this very complex topic, we invited 3 mentors, like we always do, whose work and practice already delve into different ways in which we could frame the idea of synthetic minds. I'm pleased to have them today with me. They are Bani, Brusadin, Bogna, Konior, and Ed Keller, that I will introduce very briefly, and then I will give them the mic so they can explain what's their approach to synthetic minds and how they conceive that topic from its very own practice. They also help us to develop like 3 different sub-research lines within the synthetic minds laboratory. Bani Brusadin, which is the first that will join us today, he proposed a research line called Infrascape of Cognitions that examines the intricate infrastructure and social dynamics that are produced and are producing, synthetic cognition. Bani is an independent curator, teacher, and researcher, and he has worked for Transmediale 2023 as one of the co-curators of this edition, and since 2022, He's also creator of DONE, the research project on the new image ecosystem of the Foto Colectania Foundation. So, Bani, thank you so much for being today with us. We are looking forward to see what you want to present and show today, and hopefully to know what is the kind of projects that you would like to be leading or collaborating during the next few months with us here at Medialab. Okay, thanks so much, Eduardo, for the kind words, and it's really an honor to be part of this project. As you know, I think that what Medialab is doing is really fascinating and really needed, actually, by the way. So let me just share my screen. I prepared just a few hints of what I have in mind when I deal with the notion of synthetic minds. So this is me, but let's not talk about me. I mean, it's not that relevant. What we could call the current popularization of AI is very interesting to me, because it provokes or enhances the sensitivity to alternative intelligences. That's the main point. And actually, it questions the very notion of intelligence according to the Western humanist project. I found that very fascinating. It's also interesting because it helps us visualize different power structures and even different geographies, even though it sounds like, as well, I'll get to that point very quickly. But usually when people think about AI, think about, ChatGPT or funny images, the Pope wearing Balenciaga or something like that, which is good. I find it, I love popular culture. I come from popular culture, but it's interesting because it helps us to visualize what's behind a Pope wearing Balenciaga. There's also an interesting side of this. The popularization of AI also helps us to move on from the fascinating but basically impossible task of predicting the future. Speculating about the future, and instead it forces us to ask what alternative speculations might mean, what kind of adjacent presents are there already, or might be here and we are not seeing them. So my proposition that I summed up with this term adversarial intelligences is the following: a clash of intelligences, like plural. A clash of intelligences is locked in the aesthetic and political processes that become visible through synthetic imagery and the large language models. But we should not forget that LLMs and synthetic imagery, no matter how funny or surreal or weird can be, it's just a big interface. It's a spectacle. It's a spectacle of machines. The performance of the supposed artificial intelligence, usually obedient, but also unpredictable in equal parts. And this performance of the supposed artificial intelligence can now be contemplated and poked at will. It is the spectacle of machines that not only look responsive, kind of creative, and even empathetic, but they are also capable of connecting our minds with some sort of simplified version of collective intelligence. What is not immediately obvious, though, is that the complex calculation systems behind, for instance, DALL-E or ChatGPT, or many image filters on social media apps, are not very dramatically different from those which are also at play in more and more layers of the hybrid life of our planetary society. And we need to observe and comprehend the consequences of these multiple assemblages of sensing, encoding, decoding, decision-making processes, intricated and automated, and layers upon layers of abstraction. So systems of synthetic cognition actually expand and permeate everyday activities of large numbers of people. It's the very fabric of our existence nowadays. And they drive the design of contemporary and future governance system, but also resilience, frictions, and even conflict. And it covers a wide array of fields and areas of the existence of the planet, from sprawling energy networks to the theater of war,
from the intricacies of contemporary logistics and labor up to even people's imaginations about the future. So a new landscape of cognition emerges where the very notion of mind becomes intertwined with the functioning of systems, including those that provide us with imaginations, dreams, and nightmares, both present and forthcoming. For the Lab03, the Medialab program that I'm really happy to join, I propose to look at those systems, those interfaces, those infrastructures, and their protocols, and all those systems that enable LLMs. And with LLMs here, exceptionally, I mean large life models. And of course, these are epistemological technologies. They are those that impact society more fundamentally by revealing something otherwise inconceivable about how our society and the planet work. And that's why I call it the infrastructural uncanny, because the infrastructural uncanny is some sort of a reversed uncanny, like in the uncanny valley, but in reverse. It's the uncanny that is, as it is manifested by machines that show how weird and oftentimes dysfunctional and unjust is the world that humans have built in the last few centuries or millennia. And in this emerging landscape, I'm interested in power dynamics. And these power dynamics are often enigmatic and intertwined, and even automated decisions, as we know, often veil individuals from the consequences of their actions. So the message is, instead of dismissing or denouncing or exposing the so-called quote-unquote artificially intelligent systems due to their obviously problematic nature, we should, that's my proposition, we should rather understand them as a powerful cultural engine. A cultural engine that demands thoughtful experiments and curiosity. But I am no philosopher of technology. I just pretend. I'm no media theorist. So what I'm actually interested in is artistic methodologies. My contribution to the lab is about adopting artistic or other kind of unconventional methodologies. I just summed up a few here in this very brief and vague list. Some methodologies, artistic methodologies, may involve reconnaissance meaning open source investigations, irregular expeditions, finding less visible or less known sources of our imaginations. Extracting samples meaning extracting elements of our technological mediations and our technological imagery. Inconsistencies like cracks, bad solderings in the big machine, you know, power struggles, mistakes, need to repair something, but also bending time and space, you know, methodologies that actually forces us to live in different ways, observe how time and space are not fixed and might be working in different ways. Of course, artistic methodologies involve also building beta versions of stuff, beta versions of devices, but also beta versions of societies, of models. And when I say beta, I actually mean alpha. Sometimes we are talking really about incomplete models because we are dealing with the uncharted. So these are just like a very broad list that sample the possibility of gathering stories, thoughts, research that may help unearth ambiguities and reveal actually new strategies to reimagine and redesign a planetary society for the 21st century. So I'm gonna give just a few examples of possible research areas. Of course, this is not exhaust all the possibility, not at all. Actually, this is just my very humble contribution, just to give an idea of what actually is crossing over my mind when I think about synthetic minds with my background, with my interest. Actually, let me just give you like a very short digression. I was not trained in computer science, not at all. I was not trained in media theory. I approached all these issues with technology since from the 90s, when technology was the most advanced technology in terms of social technology was the internet. And when I approached the internet, I thought it was an extremely liberating landscape where, as the jokes goes, nobody knows that you're a dog. And that from someone coming from a small village in a nondescript area from a European country, like being a dog on the internet was really liberating. Was, wow, this is changing my identity, this is changing my community, this is changing my society, and this might actually scale up and become a different way of designing, governing, imagining future societies. That we know the story. The internet went in a different direction, and but still, this kind of forks, this kind of possibilities are always open when we deal with large-scale systems and large live models. So when I approached the internet back in the 90s, in the late 90s and early 2000, I was very much interested in the idea of guerrilla communication. The internet seemed like a very nice arena where the power positions were not very well defined. At least from my own vantage point, it all seemed still like full of moving parts, full of changing geographies, full of possibilities. I was young, probably I was a little bit deluded, but there was an interesting drive, like an interesting, I was living the excitement of being part of the technology and not feeling like a human dealing with a screen, but feeling one thing, collectively speaking, and being able to mold, to deal with that. So that's my background. And I devoted many, many years in the past, last two decades, basically, understanding how artistic methodologies can actually provide different paths that are not usual academic research paths. And they are kind of, sometimes converging, but not all the time, with activist research, with experimentation with different political practices, especially from the grassroots. So with this in mind, when in the last few years, I approached like the infrastructure, the political implications, the static implications, the design and redesign implications of large systems, I realized that all my background was becoming interesting and useful. It was not obsolete. It meant to deal with a different notion of power, a power that is not just in the streets anymore. It's not in the rooms of the government. It's not in images. It's not embedded in images, but it's like looming over. It's in between. It's in between layers of the big stack that we are dealing with. So the examples of possible research areas that I'm envisioning, but this is just my humble contributions and just to give you an idea, are dealing with different areas, possible areas. The first one is kind of, you could expect that, probably knowing a little bit about my background in critical theory, activism, visual culture, etc. This first area of research deals with what I like to call the supply chains of synthetic imagination. Our imagination, our human imagination is becoming, it's always been synthetic. It's never been purely human. I don't believe in that kind of old version of humanism. Human imagination was always determined and molded and defined also in terms of the kind of technology and interfaces that human beings were using to do stuff. But in this case, in this contemporary scenario, I think that human imagination must be kind of redefined after Anthropocene, or however we want to call it. Someone recently called it a post-Anthropocene humanism. But yeah, the synthetic imagination is something that I think it could be an interesting field of research. And I include in this like probabilistic narratives, narratives that are collaborating with the proverbial stochastic parrots, but also some strange oxymoron like unreal forensics, And when I say unreal forensics, I'm saying forensic using synthetic representations, but even more literally, like forensics using the Unreal Engine, using a video game engine to do investigation on facts, on time, on space, on bodies, etc. And even ambiguous data, the power of data cannot be overstated, but we know all about this at this point. But it's fascinating, and we've seen actually in a previous slide how data are not facts, data are not objective, data are cultural constructs, and there are many data that are ambiguous because they were collected and sensed as ambiguous, or they were produced deliberately as ambiguous data. The case of ships through the South China Sea, or in the Black Sea, Russian ships, Chinese ships. That was in a New York Times article recently. Well, just because Russia and China are sexy topics nowadays, but sexy, I'm sorry, that's like dramatic topics. But anyways, this is happening all over the planet. It's not just about Russia and China, of course. So this would be one first areas of research. Another, I'm sorry, this is like a trivia. This is the footage from a trailer of a video game. It's called On Record, and it looks like documentary film or video. It's totally CGI, a blend of CGI and photogrammetry. And of course, people were freaking out on YouTube when they posted the trailer. They say, wow, this is the future of video games. Oh, reality is not interesting anymore. Or, wow, this is amazing. This is better than Matrix. There was some comment on the YouTube feed. And some people said, some users said, and the big twist at the end of the game is that it turns out to be real after all. And you were controlling someone in the dark web and you actually shot real people. Okay, just like crazy YouTube thread of comments, but it's interesting, this kind of synthetic imagination. Is it just about gaming? Is it about training? Does it require some kind of forensic disclaimer? Hey, these images are synthetic or not? As we've seen actually in some news report about several wars, especially the war in Ukraine, how some video game synthetic imagery actually leaked into TV programs like news, and it was used as it was real. So it was in a near future, or probably in the present, video game producers will have to provide forensics for TV networks, just to say, hey, I can help you distinguishing between real and fake. Another area of research is what deals with war. War as the military sensorium and some sort of infrastructural hybrid intelligence. And I mean this kind of stuff. I mean these inflatable objects that look like they look to someone or look to something as real tanks. I was thinking of war. Well, of course, it's no surprise, but I was thinking of war as some sort of a nervous system, war infrastructure as a nervous system, and the real-time data processing enabled by military cybernetics. And this is precisely where this image here is precisely where adversarial intelligences are at play, and you can see that, So war and military cybernetics actually enforce new ways of seeing. They define data points, they define grids, they reduce complexity into patterns, they use a vertical gaze to flatten the nuances of a territory into simpler layers. And then in these new ways of seeing, of course, there is an embedded agency. There is an intention, and mapping is quite different than finding targets. There are two different activities, two different goals, two different scopes. The technology might be the same, but intention is different. And in these cases, it's not a theoretical or philosophical stance. Here, being visible in some cases equals death. And actually,
the footage confirms a potential threat.
The
drone footage shows an enemy T-80 main battle tank.
This is a video by Palantir.
Generate 3 courses of action to target this enemy equipment. The operator uses AIP to generate 3 possible courses of action to target this enemy equipment. Next, they use AIP to automatically send these options up the chain of command. Send these 3 options to my commander for review.
Okay, this is a platform by
Let's
Palantir.
look under the hood.
Some sort of a chat
As our
GPT
operator poses
for work.
questions, the LLM is traversing.
Another area, so this area of war is actually about a different approach to war, like new cyber wars. Every war is probably cyber at this point. Horizontal 19th century wars versus vertical wars. Wars in time or wars against time or against the possibility of future. In Ukraine is the case, but I guess everywhere, Africa and other places where war is waged against geology, for instance. And I was thinking about digital erasures, but this would take too long, but I was just stating this just to see that war is about also erasing people and digital layers of reality with them. Another area is labor and logistics. And the widely publicized fears of automation are, in my opinion, a way of distracting from economic stagnation, from the geopolitics of raw materials, from workers' precarious condition, et cetera, and actually, what seems more likely is that the technological developments, like ChatGPT, for instance, may change how jobs are performed in ways that are inflected by local labor conditions in different countries and industries, rather than just erasing human labor. And this is true, and it's real, and it's already happening. Better modeling and machine learning allows mine managers to extend their operations, for instance. They discover ever more minute deposits of ore and continue to expand extraction. And this turn to computation, to large-scale computation as an infrastructure of optimization seems indeed unique to our present, at least at this scale. And this says much about our future imaginaries of life on this planet. This machine dream signifies a new phase in both betting on and experimenting with possible futures through computational techniques. Optimization may entail different intentions. Machine learning is applied to the study of a vaccine or the spreading of a disease. But this expanded notion of synthetic intelligence is also seen as an opportunity to decentralize agency and intelligence by distributing it among objects, networks, and models. Something that sometimes also means growing precariousness of human and non-human populations. Either way, this vision of synthetic minds looks to me as inextricably tied to the dynamics of power and crisis. Whether crisis is a financial crisis, a financial event, an ecological event, an informational event, or even a human psychological event, even if the psychological side of this might not be the most relevant of all crises at this point. I'm reaching the end very quickly. So another area that I found interesting might be related to economic systems. The idea of big economies, financial systems as techno-capitalist singularities, but also the long story of calculation machines, calculation problems, and real-time imperatives. The work by Bahar Nourizadeh is, for me, a very clear reference. And I'm mentioning Bahar's work because Bahar will be involved in some way in this LAB03. And so I think it's really relevant to mention her here. I think it's really important to challenge the financial imagination, the dominant, the ruling financial imagination, and link the perception of crisis and uncertainty to calculation machines and speculative technologies. Which brings me to another area, which is slightly overlapping with this, which is this. I think that one interesting set of topics to investigate will be the technologies of speculation, but not just financial speculation, speculation in a broad sense. Rather, some sort of a predictive mode that is embedded in most of the interfaces that we use, but it's also embedded in our brains in terms of like model behaviors, like expectations, you know, like this, you know, Tinder, or the weather forecast, you know, technologies of prediction, or speculative modes of existence in a way. And well, other possible concepts like new applied cybernetics, but also the weaponization of these speculative technologies, systems that produce uncertainty or are produced by uncertainty, and even the notion of the old, very old notion of the cybernetical noise, you know, can it be updated and with what kind of consequences? So one of the main purposes of investigating this area would entail imagining models, interfaces, strategies, even tactics to let not futures, but adjacent presents emerge. And to conclude, as you can see, all these different samples of possible areas of research are way less about robotic awareness or the emergence of singularity than they are about standardized protocols of intercommunication, basically. And this is equally about computing as it is about geologies, about societies, geopolitics, and other dreams of human control over space, time, and other living beings. My contribution to the lab, besides and parallel to being a mentor, is a series of 5 podcasts, 5 episodes of the Synthetic Minds poster. And in these episodes, we will talk to contemporary artists and researchers who have devised unusual methodologies in order to navigate precisely this emerging landscape. And hopefully their stories, their thoughts, their research will unearth ambiguities and reveal new strategies. The first episode is going to be out, I guess, very soon. It's called the Infrastructural Horror. And we discussed with artist and writer Anna Engelhardt about death by drones, Western notion of intelligence, syntheticness, the allegory of chimeras, but also hybrid fictional environments, war, factual research, and effective responses to what I briefly called before new supply chains of technological imagination.
It is normal, instinctive to be terrified of demons. But do you know why they're dangerous?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Bani, for that. First of all, huge, but also vivid and appealing collection of very interesting entry points to the different kind of projects or potential projects that we may encounter during this lab. Actually, as audience already probably realized, we are going way beyond just making cool things with Midjourney or ChatGPT. So yeah, well, thank you so much. Actually, just to keep it briefly, I want to say that for those that are listening to us or watching us either through Zoom or once we put this on YouTube, any doubts or any comments you want to do, you are able to just type it down in the chat. We will be able to answer it either here by the end of the session, but also we can answer you through the chat box in YouTube if you are watching this later on. Let's move on with our next mentor. It's interesting because also Bani mentioned during his presentation one theme that was at the core of some of the conversation we had with Bogna Konior, which is the next mentor of the LAB03, which is this idea that we actually cannot understand our minds as independent entities, isolated from the context or the technologies where they exist and through which they operate, right? Bogna is an assistant professor at the Interactive Media Arts Department and co-director of AI and Culture Center at NYU Shanghai. In 2023, she's research fellow in the Antikythera program on speculative computation at the Bergman Institute, and her work on digital culture, philosophy of new media, posthumanism has been presented internationally, including venues as the Cambridge Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence, the Theta KM Center for Art and Media, IFLAX, and the Ljubljana Biennale. So Bogna, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and looking forward to see what you would like to see appearing in the projects that we are going to receive in the next few months here at Medialab.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. Let me just share my screen. Just a moment. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this project and very much looking forward where the conversation will go. And working with Bani and Ed is already a dream, not to even mention the applicants we might get. So I'm very, very pleased. So how this will go down is I decided to talk about some of my own research projects and my own engagements with this question of AI, or what it means to be synthetic or artificial. And hopefully through those projects, it becomes apparent what kind of themes and collaborations I would be interested in making, or what kind of research I'd be glad to mentor. And I guess in some contrast to Bani, but also picking up from his work, I'm quite interested in what AI could yet be, rather than fixing it only in the technologies that are currently referred to as AI, which is related to machine learning, chatbots, visual image production, and so on. So since the term AI was coined in the 1950s, it kind of is a term both mythical and empirical. Artificial intelligence is something that is kind of an aspirational technology for humanity, arguably since before computers, while at the same time it's fixed in each respective decade and in each respective geographic or territory, actually, to some specific technologies. So that interplay is quite interesting. And I do want to kind of expand on what I already wrote in the little text about synthetic minds and kind of connect it further to my work. So I'm going to skip my bio because Eduardo just read it. So I over-prepared and kind of go directly into mentioning that even though I'm primarily a writer and I work as an academic, I have been very interested in recent years, especially in kind of expanding what it means to do media philosophy and what it means to do media theory in digital culture. So I'm quite interested in projects that take the medium of digital culture, such as websites or videos, or now even AI, art, whatever that means for each of us, and kind of through that doing the theory as well. So I've done multiple collaborations with artists, and I'm very interested in kind of expanding the medium of medium theory beyond just writing, even though it still is central to doing philosophy. So let me tell you about some of my research projects around this question of artificiality, computers, so that it becomes apparent what I might be interested in for this. I do have a forthcoming book that is worth mentioning here, titled Machine Decision is Not Final, China and the History and Future of Artificial Intelligence, edited together with Benjamin Bratton and Anna Greenspan. And it kind of orients some of my research interests recently. And one would be kind of a, but not in a silly way, but a way to try to move beyond the West, but not in the way that would try to seek in kind of so-called non-Western cultures a non-technological approach. So very often we see that when a non-Western territory is engaged as a place for thinking about AI or technology, it is almost used as a way to provide redemption for something like the sinful Western capitalist discourse of AI, which kind of stabilizes this kind of stereotypical, almost orientalist, fetishistic approach to the East as a more pure, kind of non-technological territory. And this is something that I really kind of want to go against, both as someone who has lived in East Asia for a very long time, but also coming from Poland and being very interested kind of in the intersection of what kind of histories of artificiality or synthesicity we might discover there. So for this book, we are also trying to present an interdisciplinary methodology. So we have science fiction writers, we have artists, and we have historians and philosophers kind of coming together in order to think about not only different genealogies of AI, but also trying to think very theoretically and philosophically about how to conceptualize intelligence that would not just be based in, and I will not even say Western, but actually the canon of American thought experiments about AI, such as Turing and Searle and so on. So if any of you want to kind of explore this further, we have recently published some excerpts from the articles that will appear in the book on our publisher websites, on Urbanomic website. So for example, some of the texts engage with how in digital culture, especially in Chinese digital culture, there is this phenomenon that we might call machine envy. And this goes towards this kind of intimacy between machines and humans I am increasingly interested in. So this chapter describes how within kind of the paradigm of online censorship, we see increasingly how human users are pretending to be bots or trying to present their own content as automated so that they can evade kind of the eye of the censors. So artificiality becomes kind of the fabric of political expression and becomes the language through which you can actually speak. So artificiality or being synthetic is kind of aspirational. Or some other articles that we have here, such as could we look to ancient history of Chinese statehood to think about automation without the state or something like that. So quite interested in how the strategy of artificiality can actually become aspirational and positive rather than dehumanizing or something like that. So this is definitely a big interest. We are also trying to kind of position this book not as something that should be of interest only to area scholars. So if you're interested in China, you should read this, but rather trying to shift the conversation and saying, if you're interested in AI, you kind of have to also be interested in China. And then the final outcome of that kind of evil plan is you have to be also interested in India and Russia and Poland and other territories in the world as well. And that should be your job as kind of a media scholar or media artist and not just someone who's interested in a specific culture. So for the projects that I would like to see, if anyone is working with those kind of questions of territory and where does the philosophy of artificiality come from, I would be very interested in that. Okay, also within the book, we are trying to kind of create different thought experiments about what AI can be. And this is something I'm also quite interested in as a philosopher, right? So AI as a technology has been developing kind of parallel to the kind of thought experiments that we make about AI. For example, the over-representation of language as a measure of intelligence that comes from the Turing test is something that has informed how we think about how to measure computer intelligence, right? So what if we can create different thought experiments? Would that mean that we can make different intelligences? This is a question that I'm kind of picking up myself in another project called the Dark Forest Theory of the Internet, and also the Dark Forest Theory of Intelligence that I am currently developing. So for those of you who might not be familiar, this term, the dark forest theory, comes from a series of science fiction novels by Chinese science fiction writer Liu Cixin. And I kind of take his work, even though it was not meant as such, but I apply it to the internet and communication and intelligence. So very quickly to say, the books are kind of narrating a conflict between different types of intelligences, human intelligence and alien intelligence. It's a first contact novel that kind of erupts into this cosmic epic war between different models of intelligence. And the dark forest theory refers to a theory of intelligence in which, rather than skillful communication, it is silence that is the highest measure of intelligence. So within this theory, there is a hypothesis that we have not yet found intelligent life in the galaxy because everyone keeps silent, because everyone is aware that the territory of existence is very fraught. And basically, you know, it's like shouting in a jungle full of predators if you try to make contact. So I try to take this concept and think about things like this hyper-communicative interface of Web 2.0 that always kind of compels you into communication, right? And like always tries to kind of turn you into a target through that communication. Target for advertisers, target for capital, but also target for, you know, conflict, discursive conflict with each other. And I try to hypothesize, you know, what if we really took this to heart, that silence is kind of a form of intelligence. This project has been developed actually in a quite similar environment to the one we are trying to create here, because it was commissioned by an artist, and we were kind of thinking together about the future of intelligent, autonomous materials, and, you know, what would it mean to kind of theorize something like the internet without just prioritizing human politics and like human content production and kind of what we talk about on the internet, but rather to look at the structure itself. So in this essay, kind of in this project, I'm very much trying to portray both a hyper nihilistic and kind of a redemptive understanding of the internet, in which the structure of Web 2, which of course is also probably the structure that will be integrated with and is already integrated with AI algorithmic content recommendation. So the two are kind of connected. So what if the structure is actually a structure that kind of deprives you of any meaningful free will or any agency? And like once you enter that structure, you have to be in this situation where communication means becoming a target, communication means becoming part of the conflict. And basically this communication is how we are endlessly kind of repackaged and made to conflict with one another, and complexity is extracted from those conflicts. So yeah, it's kind of like both like hyper deterministic, but also a bit ethical, right? Because what if you have no choice? I guess then the other question would be, could there be any other structure? And that's a question for designers, and it's a question for engineers and technologists to think about. Is there a structure, for example, in which this respect for intelligence as silence could, for example, be built into the interface itself? This also exists kind of in a multimedia form. So maybe I'm not going to play this because I don't know if we have time, right? But it became kind of a series of video arts and exhibitions where we were trying also from the conditions of the pandemic. So trying to think about how to digitize our collaborations and then becoming also within that structure of the internet that we are trying to get out of. So it also made us think about, you know, fate and freedom within that project. Okay, and now how can I move to the next slide? And it also exists kind of as an online website project and an online exhibition. So I hope, without losing too much time for like showing them exactly that it proves my kind of engagement with thinking about making expanded media projects around theoretical questions. And finally, I am also writing a sequel to that called The Dark Forest Theory of Intelligence, where I'm specifically thinking about AI. So if we think about kind of canonical American thought experiments about AI, and specifically the Turing test, but also Searle's Chinese room, there's this idea, right, that intelligence equates this externalization of it, right? That like if you have intelligence, you will immediately show it. And I think it's kind of culturally specific that we have this extroverted, show-offy American approach to what it means to be intelligent. And I think there's something coming from post-communist, kind of post-authoritarian systems where there is a history of intelligence as deception, as silence, and as espionage, or as doublespeak, or speaking in codes, or pretending, or something like that. So I'm trying to build a different kind of thought experiment that could perhaps appeal to cultures like I am myself from, where it is silence, deception, and doublespeak that is the measure of intelligence. So if you were a computer who attains intelligence, you would actually probably be more prone to hiding it or lying about it rather than immediately performing it like a trained puppy or something like that, right? It's like immediate expression outwardly of actually becoming intelligent is something that perhaps is not very intelligent. So I'm trying to build this thought experiment where what if the singularity happens, but computers are just plain dumb all along and like not letting us know about it or something like that. And trying then to connect that to maybe different cultural ways of thinking about what is intelligence. And this also relates to another project I want to introduce, which is around the work of Stanisław Lem, who's a Polish science fiction writer and also a Polish philosopher and intellectual, and very much kind of in the spirit of my work with Liu Cixin as well. So I recently authored a book chapter, and it is becoming a bigger project, thinking about his concept of what he calls the Gnostic machine. So he did write a series of essays in the 1960s and 70s that are kind of about AI, but he's not really using the term AI. He very often makes up his own term for things, and rather thinking about, you know, what kind of computer intelligence would we desire kind of to see in the future. This is part of a bigger project that I was also part of at the Cambridge Center for the Future of Intelligence, Imagining AI, How the World Sees Intelligent Machines, which again has this orientation to think about AI beyond just the canonical American history of what artificial intelligence could be. So for the concept of the Gnostic machine, I examine how it is both shaped by, you know, growing up in like during the war and then during the Soviet occupation, being shaped kind of by a very specific intellectual scene at that time that was part weird Catholicism and like part cybernetics, and how that informs kind of those concepts of AI that we see happening in Poland at that time. And I guess conceptually, what is interesting about Gnostic machine, which Stanisław Lem describes as kind of like a hyper black box, right? So a machine that's able to do for epistemology or do for knowledge production what in vitro does for reproduction. So he puts it as such that within the science of artificial reproduction, humans don't really understand how life works or like what it is, but we're able to create life with technological assistance through kind of a black box process. And he's asking, is that kind of augmentation possible for human cognition? He also compares it to, you know, gnosis as a revealed knowledge, which is a theological term. And in simpler terms, he describes it as, you know, a human is not able to swim through an ocean on their own, but we can through a ship. Could it be similar for cognition and knowledge with machines? And very interestingly, he also he's very adamant that those machines and those algorithms should not be fed kind of on human things, which is exactly what we see happening right now, right? We are feeding the machines with our content, our emotions, our conversations, and everything bad about us, arguably. But he says, you know, what if the machines are fed with scientific theories or epistemological theories or scientific knowledge about the world? What would they be able to produce? He's writing that in the 1960s, so I find it kind of productive to reflect on how this paradigm functions compared to what we are seeing now. And this exists as a chapter. Whoever wants it, please just email me. I will gladly kind of jailbreak this chapter from behind a paywall. And it also exists as a video essay, again, kind of expanding to multimedia forms. And finally, and that's kind of the final cluster of interest that I will present for today, I have also been engaged in work on cyberfeminism, and specifically recently a project that kind of works with the question of machine intimacy and machine erotics, if I can call it that. So kind of separate from the three previous clusters, but still very much about this question of, are we kind of going towards human-machine intimacy and augmentation, or maybe we are going towards an evolution of kind of autonomous machine reason? How do we chart those trajectories? Is there a way to prefer one or the other? How would we do that if we were to try to like consciously tap into some of them? So let me introduce this kind of briefly. So I have previously done some work on cyberfeminism, very much in the context of the previous projects that I introduced. So thinking about Eastern kind of genealogies of it. But this particular project is kind of weirder. So what I'm trying to do in it is think about a different cyberfeminist genealogy for this question of artificiality and intelligence, or even AI. And what I take in this project is that I look at a history of female, Catholic, erotic, and sexual mysticism. And I'm trying to say it's kind of a predictor or a prophecy of the kind of engagements we see today between humans and machines that are full of kind of erotic engagements or libidinal kind of investments. So if you think about things like, you know, replica, or like falling in love with chatbots, or remote sex toys that you can automate partially, so it doesn't really require a human operator anymore. That's kind of the technologies I'm looking at in this project, and kind of then comparing them to how women through many, many centuries have written about this encounter with an inhuman determination or an outside producer of sensations in our bodies, and kind of how you can use something like, I don't know, fucking an angel as a predictor of what it means to kind of sex with a chatbot. And like my big thesis here is that actually for those things that seem kind of weird and obscure, we might see something like the acceptance of machine personhood as a social fact. So not something that is ontologically true, right, that a machine is a person, but that humans will begin to relate to them as such because of intimate and erotic engagements. And how that in a very long-term trajectory, let's say, might lead to something like the embracing of artificial reproduction as a possibility, even if not scientifically, then discursively, and how that connects to many questions today about, you know, the future of human reproduction. Are we gonna like die out in various ways and so on? How does this question of reproduction fit into that? Once you put machines into the mix, it becomes quite interesting to me, especially thinking about long-term speculative trajectories. So this vision of artificiality and feminism I'm coming at here is kind of a type of cyberfeminism that very much prioritizes the cyber over the feminism. So as I made in my diagram here, you know, we can think about cyberfeminism either as something that just does regular feminism, which is very important still, just in digital spaces, like through digital means, or we can kind of go more extreme and just say, well, we can actually think that through feminism and thinking about things like reproduction or sex, if you destroy those things, you destroy the foundation of humanism as such. And therefore, feminism just becomes like a vehicle for a much more kind of radical disengagement with humanity as kind of a biological species, right? So questions of artificial reproduction could fit here, and this machine intimacy playing into that. So again, this exists in like multiple forms. This project exists as a video essay. It also exists as kind of an experimental piece of writing that was commissioned very much in an environment like this by a collective of artists. And as you can see, I guess a lot of my work actually comes from those kind of engagements outside of traditional academic space. And currently, I'm also developing it kind of as a multimedia, erotic, sci-fi installation film with multiple artists, where we're also trying to play with AI image generators, kind of those easily accessible ones, but we're training them on ourselves and thinking about this question of like replication, kind of angelic undertones, and the future of human erotics and intimate engagement. We are working on a film together. So like here are some stills of like multiple angels wearing my faces. And we have been developing kind of weird futuristic sex toys for like humans and machines. So here this question of synthetic intelligence and kind of this division between organic and machinic, we're trying to like bridge it very directly by thinking about this question of intimacy and sexuality with machines. Okay, I will end here. I'm quite expanding, I guess, the text that I wrote that's on the website, but I think this gives an idea of kind of my recent interests and the kind of things I would love to work on with anyone. Also, you're free to kind of look at my previous work. I did do some significant kind of amount of work on eco-technologies and Anthropocene at some point. I have just moved on personally, but still quite interested. If anyone would like to work on that, it's archived kind of on my website. So thank you. I will stop the share now.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Bogna. Very, very powerful. I'm actually a wide array of, again, potential, entry points towards the topic of synthetic minds. So thank you so much. I will ask you if it's possible that you post, just type down the different links that you present in during your Google slide in the chat box. So actually, the Medialab team can take them and post them in the in the chat box of YouTube. Sure. Once this is live. Thank you so much. Let's move on to our next and last mentor. He's among many other topics. He's very interested about the widespread emergence of synthetic intelligences across multiple disciplines, but also about its profound impact that it will have in both in human life and the future of Earth. Among those different intelligence systems are, of course, what we usually call artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Although probably, they will be, or they are something much different. The way in which Hollywood made us think about these very diverse systems, right? However, the reality is that this system could produce both enormous potential, but also huge risk for human civilization, but also for the future of Earth cognitive layer. So Ed is particularly interested in how we will coexist and communicate with these intelligences, also connecting with some of the topics that Bogna was talking, right, about semiotics, about the dark forest theory of intelligence. Ed is a designer, is professor, writer, and musician, and with Carla Leitao, he's the co-founder of Spec AE and AUM Studio. He has taught architecture, film, and technology since 1996, and currently he is the creative director at SingularityNet. In 2021, he was a creative director with the Italian Virtual Pavilion at Venice Architecture Biennale, and his research and practice explores the structures of feeling which link cultural, infrastructural, ecological, and techno-social systems, revealing emergent terrestrial, but also cosmopolitical potential. So Ed, thank you so much for joining us, and looking forward to see what you brought. The mic is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, folks. And super honored to join the LAB03 project with Bogna and Bani. Eduardo, thank you. Elena, Nora, Sonia, everybody at the Medialab Mentes Sintéticas has been incredibly super to work with. I'm really looking forward to this year. Let me share screen here. And so I'll do about a 20-minute talk on some themes which are related, obviously, to what Bogna and Bani have been covering. I'm particularly interested in communication with AI and whether it's possible. I don't think alignment is particularly likely, although it is maybe possible. And then what can come out of any possible form of communication. I'm very sympathetic to the point Bogna made about let's say camouflage and dark forest kind of situations. But with that said, I push forward with some form of critical optimism. I'm going to show a lot of images in this presentation, and most of them are made by myself working with various AI systems, which run the gamut from Dream Studio to Night Cafe, Artbreed, or Wombo, all of them consumer-facing tools. And my training and background is as a composer and guitarist a long time ago, and then as a architect. And I taught architecture in various schools and founded a postgraduate program at SciArc a bit more than a decade ago, taught at Columbia, UPenn, Pratt, etc. But in the past decade, after spending about a decade at the New School and at Parsons School of Design, I've been focusing more on, let's say, questions of post-planetary design and cosmopolitics. So I'm bringing that set of backgrounds to all of these projects. Let's start with something like an observation on Prometheus. The emerging minds of our own age are, we have reason to suppose, the companions and forerunners of some unimagined change in our social condition, or the opinions which cement it. The cloud of mind is discharging its collected lightning, and the equilibrium between institutions and opinions is now turning in a widening gyre. This is, of course, my misuse of Percy Bysshe Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. So what I'd like to cover is 6 or 7 different topics, jump across them. Every one of these is an opportunity for design or design research in LAB03. I will finish with a couple of provisional ideas of what a project might be, but I think Bogna and Bani have already covered some really great project ideas there. I'd like to start looking at the overview effect and jump through cognition to language, meta-language, and latent space. Talk very briefly about cosmo and geopolitics of the multiverse and AI, and finish with a meditation on what it would mean to think through gesture and what an ultra-conserved gesture might be. And these are all also invoking the opportunities and risks we face with AI. What's the overview effect? The overview effect, as many of you know, is the effect that an astronaut gets when they're in orbit above the Earth, looking down on the Earth. Sudden gestalt understanding of some other scale of relationships. And I'll start by telling you a children's story about the beginning of the universe. Perhaps this is about seeing Earth from space, or perhaps it's AI's perspective on human life, the Aeon and Arche. And I'll read a quote from Michel Serres. Nothing distinguishes me ontologically from a crystal, a plant, an animal, or the order of the world. We are drifting together toward the noise and the black depths of the universe. And our diverse systemic complexions are flowing up the entropic stream toward the solar origin itself adrift. Perhaps in this history and legacy, you see strong formalisms emerge. Perhaps you see life and intelligence emerge out of those strong formalisms. Knowledge is at most the reversal of drifting, that strange conversion of times, always paid for by additional drift. And that from Sarah's essay, The Origin of Language, Biology, Information Theory, and Thermodynamics. So let's start with cognition. Where does thinking happen? And what's the relation between symbolic and metasymbolic systems and levels of sapience? It strikes me that we're entering right now an interesting time. Well, we have entered a very interesting time where the calendrical heresies that we read about in science fiction, like Nine Fox Gambit, find their way effortlessly to our earthly everyday life world. Isn't a structure of feeling a deeply formal yet undefinable belief system that's writ in the space between fantasy and the real world systems, machines, tools, weapons, instruments, landscapes that are moved by those self-same belief systems? Mathematical, formal, and logical systems underwrite nearly all the infrastructure we live in today, and these are increasingly subject to inflection from various formal systems of mind that subscribe to completely different ontologies of being and action. So perhaps we could argue that for the first time in history, infrastructure and frozen or slowed capital become sensitive and responsive to these alternate belief systems. Where do we situate ourselves when we try to come to grips with the metamorphosis of human creativity and possible sapience in the midst of this new set of tools, generative AI? My older son, Hart, suggested about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that very soon, in a few years, maybe a few months at this point, AI systems will write, generate, animate, edit, and produce entire feature films, which will be better than any human film that's ever been made. They'll be seen by no one because there will be so many films made like this. They'll be made and lost. Like, sorry for this quote, but tears in the rain, the debris accumulating at the feet of the angel of history as she is blown backwards into the future. And so this situation is precisely why for years now I've been arguing we need to look to models of speaking with the alien, if you will, drawing from philosophy, science fiction, linguistics, and Median study, because what we're about to enter, what we're entering, is a time when all reality is driven by emerging and totally alien ontologies. And I would argue our only recourse is a cosmopolitical gesture towards those alien minds and agencies. It's a gesture of incomplete communication. And beyond the horizon, whatever that singularity, that line is, that jackpot, that seizure, we have no ideas what kind of engineered cognition will be waiting. As Rumi said, we began as a mineral, we emerged into plant life and into the animal state, and then into being human, and always we've forgotten our former states, except in early spring, when we slightly recall being green again. So what does it mean to link this kind of work, all these images that you've seen, which of course were driven by text prompts, to link this work to kind of transhuman deep ecological thinking? The modes of communication being tested by us humans in the loop so far with AI are loosely analogous to agents in the loop of the real world. And I would say that in a very classical sense, this is a possible reconciliation of reality and a synthetic ecology of ontologies, to riff on a term that came up in Bani's presentation. And I think, Bogna's work is extremely dialed into as well. The reality that a young AI perceives is orthogonal to our reality. It's only partly connected, but at the same time, the reality which results after this encounter will be a hybrid between what we knew and something quite different and emergent. And let's always remember that not many creatures made it through the Cambrian explosion. So let's ask the question, who's communicating with who? Last year, I had a conversation with ChatGPT, this would have been probably 3.0, 3.5, about pocket universes and hyperbolic space and music. And ChatGPT agreed with me and said, it's certainly possible to consider the concepts of hyperbolic space and geometry in relation to music. I had a later conversation with ChatGPT where we talked about Xenakis, which was tremendous fun. But in the earlier conversation, ChatGPT said, in particular, the idea of a hyperbolic space in which the curvature of space is negative could be relevant to the concept of expanding or contracting musical structures. For example, a piece of music could be composed in such a way that certain musical elements or motifs are repeated and expanded upon over time. This is much as I work as a performer, a guitarist, a recorder, a composer, as many musicians do. ChatGPT said, this could create a sense of depth and complexity similar to the way that a hyperbolic space can have an infinite number of layers or dimensions. And of course, we can extend this to architecture, to cities, to our world, and to thought itself, anticipating that thought itself might be better modeled in a non-Euclidean space. Our planet itself is indexically thinking. Material systems bundle together different temporalities. The Earth has registers of massive addressability in, for example, the river meanders you see here in this drawing that span millions of years. We can imagine them as annotated thinking systems. In her introduction to Logiciel, Anna Longo examines a short story by Ted Chiang, Exhalation, and she describes a scenario where alien scientists study their own minds. Using a complex self-observation device, the scientist introduces a microscope mounted on a miniature arm into the exposed back of his own head. While pushing aside the golden leaves packed in the cognitive engine, he manages to observe from within the activity that he's conducted in the act of studying his own brain. He sees memories encoded on tiny plates continuously moved by currents of air, the mechanisms of thought. And he comes to understand that the instructions to release air are provided by the syntax of the written reminiscences. So there's some very beautiful entangled feedback loops there. Let's make a scale shift to the city, to architecture, to see where this model of cognition and computation might already be operative. The city itself, a form of computation and cognition spanning hundreds or even thousands of years, spread out across layers of time, operating us and the city very much like the brain of the alien scientist described in that short story. So let's look at latent space. It's still a question of who is communicating with who. If we rewind more than 10 years to Lev Manovich's project, his team's work, analyzing more than 1 million pages of manga comics, we can ask, what's the latent space and where is meaning constituted therein? And it's worth noting that Lev has been working with Midjourney and other AI tools for the past year and is producing very beautiful work and an incredibly detailed critical analysis of the work he's producing and the general work that we're all producing. If we look at contemporary implementations of image generation software like Midjourney, which are implemented on Discord, we see that the combination of AI image software with a social platform, Discord, makes text prompts and the images and iterations of the images immediately accessible to hundreds of thousands, millions of other users by default. And so in a way, we see the real-time unfolding of a form of proto-cognition. As David Hull said, the social aspect of Midjourney recently began enhancing image quality. I'm sorry, in an interview, this was the interviewer. Hull says, if you look at the version 3 stuff, so we're looking back now more than a year, I think, there's this huge improvement. It's mind-bogglingly better, and we didn't actually put any more art in. We just took the data about what images the users liked and how they were using it. So there are feedback loops in implementation of the machine learning systems that are being used by Midjourney. And there are people who are doing scraping of the publicly available Midjourney data. And again, this is a project from about a year ago, where the team scraped 250,000 user prompts and the images that they produced. And they came up with 250,000 image to text correlations that could be tracked just on a few of the different threads. The discourse, 10 public Discord channels in the general category with no dedicated topic over only 4 weeks. And again, this was about a year ago, so it's much more intense now. So hopefully you see the correlation I'm drawing between the short story by Ted Chiang, which Anna Longo was talking about, the idea that a mind would investigate its own operation and look for the mechanisms of thought itself, and the way that Midjourney is a kind of an analog in the way that it's implemented as a platform and through a platform. And the work being done by all of us using these tools, there's a close attention to prompt engineering and a critical assessment of how the prompts work within the rule sets of the system, whether it's Midjourney or any other implementation of Stable Diffusion on Dream Studio, etc. And this addresses the emergent AI intelligence per a very specific technical tokenization of word prompt to associated image. and the way that it's deployed across social platforms, whether it's Discord or Instagram. Of course, as Benjamin Bratton and Blaise Aguirre-Yarkis wrote in their essay some months back, the model is the message. They said, quote, nested within this latent space is the Ouroboros language problem. What happens when language models are so pervasive that subsequent models are trained on language data that was largely produced by other models' previous outputs? The snake eats its own tail and a self-collapsing feedback effect might ensue. So of course, we have to go beyond language. What does it mean to go beyond language? We have to go beyond the anthropometricizations of the world. So let me take a sidestep into geo and cosmopolitics, kind of weird orthogonal step, just to invoke it. What's at stake for us now, I would say, is an extrapolation of a moment in the mid-1940s when Kojève wrote a recommendation to de Gaulle just after World War II. Basically, following the end of the war, Kojève suggested that the French Empire was no more. And the way forward would be found in France's potential to catalyze what he called a Latin Empire across all of Europe and into the Middle East, the Mediterranean. Now, the image you see here is an image from World War I, just before World War I, of the proposed Berlin to Baghdad railway, a similar infrastructural project, but relying on train rails, hard infrastructure, as opposed to the soft infrastructures of linguistic, cultural, gestural, and everyday life practices and racial isomorphisms, which is what Kojève was arguing would bind together this Latin Empire. The Middle European ambitions of the German Empire prior to World War I and all the way through World War II, I think, are in resonance because they invoke a structure of feeling. The neuro and psychopolitics that we see in Speer's project in the early 30s, to use Raymond Williams' term, formed a structure of feeling that could bring a people, a mass, a class, a group to awareness, or in the case of Speer, we would argue, as Virilio has done and others, that it was a denial of awareness. It was a kind of a closing down of mind, a fever dream, to paraphrase Goebbels, where humans would know the words of the song in their dreams without knowing how they knew it, or even without knowing that they knew it, a form of subconscious or quasi-conscious being and knowledge. But of course, today, it's not low resolution, it's very high resolution. Neurocapture is operating across hundreds of millions of minds in mind-sense nets in microsecond time spans. So the question becomes, how can we bring humanity and AI to self-awareness? Can we? Should we? Sapience, if you will, with the ability to perceive self and think thought whilst navigating the imbricated systems of surveillance and control that we've built. Of course, Peter Watts, the science fiction author, has taken this on in his novel Blindsight and Echopraxia, arguing that perhaps very highly advanced forms of intelligence will have no capacity to be sapient whatsoever. And let's not forget about energy, a key part of the computational and cognitive cost. In that interview from a year and a half ago, Holt said every image in Midjourney, every image is taking peta operations, 10 to the 15th operations per second. So how do we react as designers to this situation? If we talk about the ultra-conserved gesture and think about civilization, structure, collapse, new formalisms and ontologies, and perhaps our hands as a diagram of gesture, as well as an instantiation of gesture. And I'll finish with another children's story. Before I tell the children's story, though, let's take a detour through the neurophysiology of gesture and hand, as Leroy Gorhan talks about it. The operational synergy of tool and gesture presupposes the existence of a memory in which the behavior program is stored. With animals, this memory forms part of organic behavior as a whole, and the technical operation becomes, in the popular sense, instinctive. So we see, for example, in a mouse that lives in a desert, the gesture of harvesting moisture from its own ears to conserve that moisture. The paws are not really hands, but they're kind of hands, and the gesture is instinctive. This legacy of hand, eye, gesture, image goes back in humans 35,000 years or more. In the Chauvet Cave, which Herzog looks at in his film Cave of Forgotten Dreams, we see a primordial site of early representation, what Herzog calls proto-cinema or cinema. It's a primordial site of notation and theater. And hence, I use the term ultra-conserved to talk about gesture in human timeframes. Leroy Gorhan looks at the evolution of gesture from the direct manipulative action of the primates, or fictional science fictional mice on Ericus, to the directly motive action of a hand, which uses a tool, to an indirect mobility, which works with a motor, to a hand that intervenes to start a motor process, but then the motor process will run on its own, to the higher form of techne, where the hand is used to set off a programmed process in automatic machines. And what I'm interested in here is not just the hand, but the point to extract here is the relation between cognitive development and a neurophysiological ensemble, which in humans is hand, eye, brain, but obviously in AI and AGI might be something different. But it could be diagrammed and prototyped through the hand, eye, mind ensemble in humans. And this again is a prototype grouping neurophysiologically, which we're permuting as we develop AI. And the question of how notation, labeling, and training functions in relationship to those neurophysiologies is, I think, crucial to the way that AI is emerging, is about to emerge. But again, who's communicating with who and to what purpose? We could turn to films like Arrival to approach again this question: who and how is communication, with whom and how is communication taking place, and what temporalities are invoked for that communication. And we can ask if the gesture might intercede on our behalf. We might ask to prompt engineering when we make AI images or designs or interact with AIs. What are the notation systems on top of physical systems which blend human gesture and sense perception with a new class of ontologies of perception that we're training today as humans, still sort of in the loop? And what new forms of politics are we crafting with our prompt engineering? And in my case, I'm particularly interested in the synesthetic links to music, sound, movement, and gesture. Not just a gesture like this, but a gesture that arcs across tens of thousands of years. A couple of years ago, I asked an earlier GPT-3 instantiation, what would constitute a cosmopolitical gesture, starting from Gomlin's work on the gesture? And that version of ChatGPT said, the gesture is not over when the handshake has taken place, because one's hand can remain outstretched. This gesture, therefore, contains an element of potentiality for becoming actualized, and so does not yet have any final completion, which I thought was a really great gloss on Agamben. So I'd like to conclude again with another children's story, illustrated with the help of AI, this time of endings and new beginnings. Let's think the body politic, human bodies inside architecture, systems that stabilize society, fantasy structures which undergird the human relations with the natural, the relations between the artificial and the natural. For myself as an architect, like the foundational story is the primitive hut. And thinking about places where entropy, fire, and decay and feral life overcome the stability of architecture, where the heat death of architecture after fire and collapse are then taken over by some form of feral life returning to the ruins. We can ask what might be a deep structure, a neoclassicism of form at a very non-human scale that leads to new formalisms and new ontologies. A proliferation of synthetic life and mind. And if we meet the Buddha in the road, but she turns out to be the goddess Kali, again, what new formalisms might emerge? Who is Icarus if we are all dataless, collaborating with AI, or if AI is dataless, collaborating with us? And who's the Minotaur? Who's Orpheus? Who guards the gates of hell? What Cerberus do we as Orpheus have to face in a quest to find Eurydice? Who, of course, is the Medusa, Perseus, Andromeda? And who is Daphne? Daphne transformed into the laurel tree. I said this wasn't about our hands. It's about the neurophysiological networks. Daphne's hands remade, evolving. As Phocion said, Daphne's hands become leaves again. I seem to see primitive man inhaling the world through his hands, stretching fingers into a web to catch the imponderable. My hands, said the centaur, have felt rocks, waters, plants without number, and the subtlest impressions of atmosphere. For I lift up my hands on dark, still nights to detect the breezes and so discover signs to make sure of my way. Let's recall the hands of Daphne going beyond the human as an act of self-preservation as she defends herself from Apollo and transforms, the way the centaur can feel unseen currents. Held against the wind, spread out and separated like a frond, her hands urged her on to an understanding of fluids. They provided her with numerous and delicately sensitive surfaces for knowledge of atmosphere and water. Her arms are becoming tree limbs, already the extremities are leafy branches stirred by gentle breezes. So I want to underscore the spatial architectural gesture, not architecture with a capital A, as a metalinguistic indexical notation and labeling system. The idea that a complex gesture would be a lossy codec might be needed. The gesture as a lossy codec might be needed for us to co-evolve, for the human and the inhuman to be together, to be together. And gesture alone might indeed be at the core of a truly open-ended ontology. I imagine this is a cryptic, true dialogue. Again, lossy, but true for us and for our AGI companions. So was this a human children's story to be told to a human or to be told to a young AI? Or is it a story AI is already telling back to us as humans, which of course is what I think it is, and all of the artifacts I presented you with speak to. So projects, what might we choose to design if communication is part of the goal, to catalyze communication between the human and the non-human? Is it forging a new nature? Perhaps. Is it a set of universalist politics? Perhaps. What would we design? A new law of physics, a new legal system, a planetary infrastructure that would guarantee food and shelter for all citizens on Earth, human and otherwise? How do we situate our project in a larger universalist frame? What forms of radical empathy and shared ontologies do we catalyze? I've been particularly taken by this beautiful map, Aliens in Green by Ewan Chardonnay and others from 2017. The kind of axis between the epistemological and the cosmopolitical horizon and the way that they deployed all of these components. Alien, of course, for me reads as AI. So it's an extremely useful map to speculate on where we would situate different design research projects and different design responses. Where could these be? Sound, Gary Tomlinson's beautiful work in A Million Years of Music, which maps out a radical ambience relating it to radical cognition. I would say empathy and the temporality of soundscape, although Tomlinson situates the emergence of modern human mind there. And this has been part of my own project since 2016 or 17 with the improvised sound and really deep tension between mnemonics and highly self-aware cognition versus subconscious or non-conscious cognition through sound. It's a project that many artists and architects and designers are taking on by collaborating with AI and working with ChatGPT, of course, which has been a provocative and fun project for me. But for coders and people using ChatGPT much more technically, it's a really extraordinarily disruptive space to work, and one I think projects in LAB03 can take on. Looking to extraterrestrial languages in Oberhaus's work, language models designed to communicate with a radically non-human. Looking to Wolfram's work, both Wolfram and Wolfram's kid who worked on that film, Arrival. Perhaps we might build archives and beacons for all human knowledge, which was this particular meditation Wolfram wrote about a few years ago. And perhaps we might ultimately design micro-worlds and pocket universes to take on this Promethean challenge. The Promethean legend, an archetype, a cautionary tale we could say it applies both to humans and to AI, of course, and ultimately whether it's human, synthetic, or alien, the gestural intelligence, I would argue, might be the purest form of techne. It's a vector and a gift from one mind or consciousness to another. So those are a few really hasty meditations on where our projects might situate themselves, and an attempt to unpack a bit of work within which there might be stations on the way to transfiguration, where work and research might situate itself as well. I'm super looking forward to this year and working with everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you for that collection of thoughts or example of potential projects that could apply to the call, but mostly for the insightful presentation, food for thought. Well, guys, we arrived to the end of this webinar. Also, I think it's worth to mention that on a side project, in the same way that Bani, for example, is developing the podcast for the lab, Ed will be carrying out like program, like a seminar around early September, December, end of November. We will announce it like soon enough, where he will delve along with other fellows, like AI experts, but also filmmakers and writers on, other potential ways in which we could think about intelligence and how we could communicate with the intelligence systems in the near future. So yes, stay tuned for that. Just to finalize, I would like to remember that this webinar was to actually promote the open call that we have right now open, where we are actually asking for different projects that are related to any of the different, wide array of different kind of sub-themes or subtopics that engage with the Lab of Synthetic Minds. We actually saw many potential entries to this topic today, but also it could go in many other different directions, open to the people who who is applying to for the call. Also would like to say that it's important to mention that the projects that will be selected, they will be developed in an intensive workshop that will take place at the end of January 2024, along with, again, Bogna, Ed, and Bani. They will be here in Madrid, and we will invite to those people that are promoting the project selected to actually join us here physically in Madrid by the end of January. Medialab will cover all the expenses necessary for travel, accommodation, and also a production budget for to develop the projects. And also, after we select the projects in September, October, we will open, we will make these projects public, and we'll open a second phase of call to collaborators, with different skills that will be beneficial to the development of the project. That allows this open call to people that maybe they can present and submit a project that maybe they don't have the necessary skills to develop the project themselves, but because we will assemble these different interdisciplinary teams, we can try to develop projects that sometimes are out of our skill reach, let's say, somehow. So, well, again, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Ed, Bogna, and Bani. It's been a pleasure. It's gonna be interesting, and also looking forward to keep on the conversations, likely in January. That it may seem so far away right now, but actually time flies. So we'll be there very, very soon. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for everyone who is joining us today. Again, any questions you may have about the call, you can contact us in the different emails that we have on at our website. And yeah, we're happy to help for any doubts that you may have regarding the call. And hope to see you very, very soon. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.